When Worlds Collide by Reddit user Morbius Green. Performed by the author. Chapter 1. The human race had been extinct for the past 5,000 years. The ruins of their once proud civilization had now become all but a memory, the only visible remnants being small watchtowers on the edge of their former kingdoms, which were now homes for wild animals. The farms had been replaced by large forests. Their famous libraries had burned due to lightning strikes. The houses, markets, and castles had fallen to rubble ages ago, returning to the earth. Their many kingdoms once controlled the lowest part of the continent, surrounding the Furin Inland Sea. They went extinct in the year 2112 of the Elven calendar by invading forces from the north, who sent their ships down the continent and invaded the southern, eastern, and western coasts of their territories. While the humans put up a valiant fight, in the end they lost. Legend states that a human messenger made their way to the deep woods north of the human kingdoms and reported a weakness in the main enemy lines before dying in front of the King of the Wood. The messenger was buried in ceremonial elven fashion. This last act of humanity provided key information for the other races to defeat the evil that had arisen in the north. The other races of Fair Eduin avoided stepping foot into the land formerly controlled by humans out of respect for their sacrifice to save Fair Eduin. Sometimes children would enter the crumbling ruins to play, but that was the extent of any intrusion. For races like the fairies and Marians, the fate of humanity didn't have as much of an effort on them as it did the other races, but they mourned nonetheless. Humanity had not had dealings with many of the races that inhabited the continent at their death, so these races had no idea how to react. The two species that mourned humanity the most were the elves and dwarves, those closest to humanity. Many soothsayers and astrologers predicted that the human race would return, but could not divine as to how this would occur, or rather, would disagree on the manner of their return. Some said they would come as messengers of the goddess Etris, creator of the world of Athalion in time of great need, when the evil magic of the frozen north rose once more to threaten the peace of Fair Eduin. Other races claimed that they would never return, and that it was a waste to let their former lands remain empty. This mostly came from the dwarves. The elves held the former view, saying that it was unwise to disturb the resting place of one of the first races. Time went on, and most of the people of Fair Eduin forgot about humanity, only remembering them in songs and legends. Only the oldest and wisest of the elves and dwarves would remember and tell their progeny of the lost race. They would pray to the goddess to allow the return of humanity. Eventually, she listened, but not in a way that any expected. It was the year 7117 of the Elven calendar, on the 5th day of the month of Andorin, which on that year fell on Ianho, the 3rd day of the week. On this cool spring day, the small trade city of Farsight was busy. Many carts were arriving to trade in the local market. This included great works of metalworking and gemworking from the dwarves, fish that the Marion had sent by means of elf traders, wood and oil from the northern lands, and food from every race. Farsight was built in the year 6827 as a trading post. It was located at the southernmost border of the deep wood, and overlooked the former human lands, Even the Furin inland sea glistened in the morning sunlight. The sky was clear and blue, save for a few wisps of cloud in the west. Even in the early morning hours, the marketplace was bustling with people. Like most trading cities, Farsight was neutral ground, and anyone could live there and have full rights, regardless of the territory in which the city lay. Among the crowd, a young Draka by the name of Corzin ran through the market toward the section devoted to the sales of all things made of jewelry. Like all Draka, he had dark green scales, powerful hind legs with 3 toes, long black hair, 5 black talons on each hand, and powerful wings, which, at the present, were at his side. He wore brown trousers and a tunic that only covered his chest and back. His kind didn't have the need for shoes, since their feet were well protected.
Oh, watch it. You'll break your neck if you don't slow down, boy.
A burly dwarf cautioned him as Corzin stopped to catch his breath. Sorry, I'm just in a hurry. There's someone here I need to see. The dwarf simply looked him up and down and said,
Be careful.
He then returned to his work. Corzin bowed respectfully to the dwarf before heading back out into the streets. He was grateful that, while it was a busy day, it didn't appear to be as busy as it normally was yet. He ran through the ever-growing crowd and eventually reached a booth. Behind the counter full of weapons and gems sat a silver-haired, feline Kanti named Dara. She immediately stood.
Corzin? Are you all right?
She poured him a cool mug of water, which he downed instantly. Yeah, I'm fine, he gasped once he'd caught his breath. I just had to see you. From her throat, Corzin could hear purring. She smiled, walked over, and hugged him.
It's good to see you, Corzin,
she said.
It's been far too long. How old are you now?
He stood proudly. I am now a Draka of 18. She smiled wider.
That's great.
He nodded, suddenly nervous. Dara was only a few months older than he was, but had already established herself as a master dealer and trader. Corzin, on the other hand, had only left the city of his birth a handful of times to see the ocean and a few forests. The only aspiration he had was to be a warrior and to help keep the forces of the north at bay.
Corzin, you're chewing on your lip again,
Dara said softly. He took a deep breath, forcing himself not to bite on his lips.
Dara?
She turned to face him, her smile warming his heart like an evening fire. He opened his mouth to say something, and that was when the sun began to dim. Everyone looked up. There were no clouds near the sun, but its brightness had been diminished. The sky began turning dark blue. The ground beneath them trembled and seemed to flicker, as if the entire world were on fire. This sparked a memory in Corzin, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Dara spoke the words first. It was in an ancient tongue, one not spoken since the beginning of time. She said, staring intently at the dimming sunlight. People were beginning to panic and were running inside their homes or their stalls. Horses were beginning to panic. Corzin barely noticed this as he was intently staring at the sun. The sky was now black, and the sun was as bright as the moon's, but it was still growing dimmer and dimmer. A powerful wind was blowing, and the flickering of the landscape around them was increasing. Gilditch inte Peragoim, he repeated, reaching Dara and taking her soft furry hand in his own rough, scaled ones. He shook his head. He focused on the memories so long ago that it was difficult. With clarity, he remembered. Glitch in the program. And with that, all sensation left him. Lying on a cool white medical bed, wearing only a thin white hospital gown, a man was receiving a final look over by a small medical bot. The man was strapped down to keep him from floating away in a zero-G environment. The medbot grabbed a syringe and injected him with it. With that, the man's eyes fluttered. He groaned as he attempted to sit up.
Please relax, Mr. April,
A familiar female voice said.
The machine has to work for a little longer.
Reflexively, he began to take deep breaths. Although in his sleepy state, he had no idea why he was doing so. Memory slowly began to return, then came crashing back. He took more deep breaths to keep the nausea down. A cool substance touched his lips, and he drank.
Eve, is that you?
He coughed. Despite having just been given a glass of water, his voice was still hoarse.
Affirmative, Mr. April.
Kelvin is fine. What happened in there? Was there some sort of glitch?
There was a short pause.
It's more complicated than that. I'll tell you later. Are you ready to be released?
The wave of nausea had passed, and all he could feel was the slight ache that came from weightlessness. That, plus hunger and thirst. He opened his eyes and found that he was facing the door.
I'm ready.
The restraints were released and moved away. He gently pushed off from the bed, and his trained body moved toward the door, which opened.
Is anyone else awake yet?
He asked as he followed the red arrows on the walls.
You are the first, but the rest are beginning to wake up.
Did we lose anyone?
No one.
He nodded in relief.
That's a plus. Those systems haven't failed us yet. How many were in the simulation when this happened?
The entire ship was inside.
How are their memories coming back? Have we lost anyone in that way?
No. All projections indicate that they will recover 99% of their real-world and virtual memories.
Kelvin beamed. Memory restoration had come a long way since the cure for Alzheimer's had been found.
Where are we going?
The observation room. I think that everyone needs to be here when I reveal where we are.
Kelvin didn't like the sound of that.
Eve, has something happened? How long have we been asleep?
550 years, 7 months, 15
No need
days.
to go further. I get the picture.
So we're only 20 years away from our target planet.
Soon, he reached a large circular door which hissed open. The observation room was a large domed atrium filled with cushioned seats. No one else was there, so Kelvin found a seat in the back and sat down. He strapped himself in and closed his eyes. He must have fallen asleep because when he next opened his eyes, the room was alive and there was noise and movement. Most of the seats near the front were already filled and people were talking among themselves. The atrium could seat 2,000 colonists, but the Guardian only contained 1,500 due to the lack of interest in the high fantasy VR program. As such, the seats near the back were mostly unoccupied. The closest person to him was a few rows down, reading a book. Kelvin reached down, pulled out the earpiece that came with his seat, put them in, and was surrounded by silence immediately. He was still tired, so he closed his eyes again. A soft tone woke him the second time. This time there were more people, and they were all seated.
Hello.
The voice of Eve spoke through the earpieces.
I do apologize for suddenly awaking you, but there is a matter that required me to pull you out. Allow me to get straight to the point. Just before the system-wide glitch in the VR world, my sensors detected a distortion in space directly ahead. I attempted to direct us away from it, but the distortion seemed to follow. It got bigger and suddenly engulfed the ship. I feared all was lost, but to my great surprise, I found that the Guardian had ended up in orbit of an unknown terrestrial world, but this world is special. I figured that telling you would make you not believe me, so I decided to show you all at once.
The lights had already dimmed. A crack appeared in the ceiling and spread. Bright blue light poured in, temporarily blinding everyone. However, as the shielding fell away from the observation dome, Kelvin's eyes began to adjust and he glanced up. Large, swirling cloud systems were what he first noticed. Next, he noticed the green of vegetation, the blue of large lakes on the land, and a deep blue sea surrounding whatever continent they were orbiting above.
Before everyone asks where we are, I ask that you look carefully at the landmass below us. I placed the Guardian in stationary orbit around this particular one for a reason.
Kelvin looked closer, trying to discern if there was anything he should be noticing. At once he spotted it. Signs of agriculture and roads. Something else caught his eye, though. He peered closer, and his eyes widened in disbelief as he noted the shape of the continent itself.
It can't be. Fair Edwin?